Lately, the news has been full of stories where racism clearly seems to be at play. Black people reported to the police for napping, shopping, even pushing their kid in a stroller. But then there's the case of the struggling seaport restaurant La Casa de Pedro. Adam has more.
That's La Casa de Pedro in happier times. These days, though, the restaurant's prospects look grim. The owner has filed for bankruptcy. The landlord wants the place gone, citing 9 months of unpaid rent. But this week, the Boston Globe suggested there's another factor at play.
They came back to race because the restaurant owners said they couldn't do the types of things that they needed to do to generate more money.
Things, Globe reporter Megan Irons says, like weekly brunches and hip-hop nights aimed at Black and Latino patrons.
A couple of the ideas that the owners had brought a lot of people of color onto that particular section of Congress Street, and that was the reason for a lot of the complaints from the neighbors upstairs.
Unless it wasn't. The Globe's own story mentioned recurring complaints of disorderly conduct. And in this WGBH News story, the landlord said departing patrons were intoxicated, rowdy, and loud. Online, the racism narrative sparked pushback from Globe readers. I have no idea what race and ethnicity has to do with this story, said one. It's a generic story about a failing business. For the record, Irons says there was debate inside the Globe, too.
I remember my editor, Shira Center, questioning, well, didn't these people get in over their heads? Isn't this about, just kind of lack of planning? And so I kind of pushed back a little bit.
Because Irons says when a restaurant gets an email saying it's attracting a clientele that is not appropriate, the implication is clear. When
you say things like that, it moves it from just, being a class issue and a business issue and a money issue, and it gets into a race issue.
I had a problem with this when I first read it, and we ended up doing it on WGBH. Actually, the story had come to us at the same time. I don't know, somebody was peddling it around, but here was my problem with it. When they over an 18-month period, they ran up a $3 million bet, which is a lot. That's significant, and they were unable to pay their rent. So in order to try to overcome that economic failing, they started coming up with these other ideas, which was the brunch and then the rooftop thing.
Club nights.
Club nights. So it wasn't until that started that this whole racist idea got going. But they were already well in debt. And there's another restaurant, by the way, in Watertown that we order from and stuff that does very, very well. And they thought, well, the Seaport, it's the hot area. So, I mean, it feels a little bit shaky.
Yeah, the Globe said that they're paying $64,000 a month in rent in the Seaport.
That's the problem.
For viewers who might not have an easy time seeing the TV, I will note for the record that I'm a white guy as I prepared to weigh in this. I think I'm also a white guy who tends to see racism at play in a lot of situations where some other white guys I know do not. I appreciate Megan Irons talking with us. I know Megan a bit. I really like her reporting. I'm still unconvinced that race was the driving factor here. That email that said, the clientele's not appropriate, the final bit of that is not appropriate for something like our luxury apartments or a luxury building. And that, when I'm in the Seaport, I feel like I don't belong there because I'm making, geometrically less money than everyone else who's walking around. I talked to the landlord. No, it's a playground for it's lily white and it's incredibly affluent. I talked to the landlord, the woman who runs the company that is leasing space, and she told me, this really truly had nothing to do with race. People were vomiting. We have a videotape of a guy peeing on the building. People were shouting at 2:30 in the morning. Whatever the skin color of people who were doing that, we would have complained to the restaurant, but ultimately it's about the unpaid rent. We tried to work with them. We put them on a payment plan. They haven't gotten us the money they need, so they need to.
I'm not convinced that this is a question of racism either, and like Adam, I am a white guy.
How's it going?
But I do think that...
How's it going? We'll find out in a minute.
I do think that it fits into a larger narrative about the Seaport District. I mean, the Globe just did this really good in-depth story about race in Boston, and one of the parts about that was what an affluent lily-white area the Seaport District is. So I think that when you have a situation such as the one involving this restaurant and the problems it's run into, it's natural to put it in that larger context, even if this was not specifically an instance of racism.
But it felt to me like a convenient way to kind of re-engage that narrative, and here was the example of that.
Well, that is a story worth telling, but maybe the specific nature of this shouldn't have been pushed as hard as it was.
Once again, it can be both and.
Yes.
So let me just say they could be $3 million in debt. All the other things that you said are true. But the reason that you have a diverse staff is that there are some cultural cues that immediately click in. If you start using language like, I am concerned about the clientele, and if it goes right to the music is too loud, I'm going to just question where you're coming from, because that is chapter and verse of the kind of thing you hear over and over again, when it is in fact no question about it, just a plain old case of racism. So in this case, we have some layers, some complexity to how we are to assess this. But make no mistake about it, some of the language that has been addressed and some of the things they said, now, don't misunderstand. I don't want to step outside and see people throwing up outside my apartment either. That's not appropriate in any situation. But I'm going with Megan hearing something that she thought was appropriate to follow up, and it could also be they're in debt.
I just want to say that Megan made a similar point when I talked to her. We didn't put it on camera, but I think she sees race as having much greater weight than I would be inclined to give it reading these stories, but she sees a number of factors at play here, and I think it's fair to say with that is maybe the dominant one. Sorry.
I think the complaint in that email may definitely have had racist overtones to it, but that complaint isn't the thing that brought down this restaurant. I mean, opening 6 months late in a location that requires a lot of foot traffic right as Boston's really lovely nor'easter-filled winter's about to start, that's not a good business move. Agreeing to spend $64,000 a month in rent when the first few months you don't bring in that much in revenue, not a good business move.
And it's not also a place where people go for ethnic food. The Seaport is generic.
Exactly.
It's Strega.
So something new might have been exciting, but people don't necessarily go back for that excitement all the while. I see a lot of business missteps, but I also see some racist overtones in that complaint.
And I just want to say one thing. People will go across town to food. It doesn't matter where it is. So that
if it's any good.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that in itself is not the fact that it's not generally thought of as an area outside of steak and potatoes or whatever does not mean anything, because people will go to the ends of the earth to get something.
I got to say, we focused on the Globe because they did a couple of features, and there was a column from Adrian Walker. We did the one piece by Philip Martin, so that's why we put our focus there.
All right.